designed to connect, inspire, and empower women through curated cultural experiences. And this is the second iteration of our conversation series featuring women in the arts, and have partnered with emerging leaders of New York arts. And Jessica Lantos will tell you a little bit about ELNYA.
Thank you, Alex. Hi, my name is Jessica Lantos, and I've been a board member and co-chair of ELNYA, also known as Emerging Leaders of New York Arts. And we are volunteer-run. We've been around for 10 years, and really across all industries within the creative fields, visual arts, performing arts, arts administrators, providing leadership opportunities through our fellowship, networking opportunities, and a lot of programming throughout the year. So we are really thrilled to have all of these fabulous women as partners tonight. And thank you, Anita, for hosting all of us, and to our great panelists, too. And if you have any questions, I'm around later, too. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I will speak into the mic now. So I just first want to thank our panelists and Anita again for hosting us. And so first we have Danika Druttman, who is the Director of Cultural Programming at the Roger Smith Hotel. Anita Rogers, who is the founder of Anita Rogers Gallery and also the British American Household Staffing, and Lisa Small, who is the Senior Curator of European Art at the Brooklyn Museum. So, thank you so much for being here. So first, can you each just tell us a little bit about your careers and how you got to where you are today? You all have come through different routes, so I'd love to just start out there. Do you want to
start with me?
Yeah.
So I moved to New York from London about 11 years ago, and when I first moved here, I was just out of university and essentially gave myself 2 years to try anything. And after 2 years, had to decide what it is I wanted to do and follow that route. And right at the end of those 2 years, where I really just had not worked it out, a really amazing opportunity fell into my lap by a really sort of really special organization and a really extraordinary person. And they essentially opened my eyes to the direction that was meant to be my career path, and that was the Roger Smith Hotel. So I started there as an intern, became an assistant, became a manager, director of cultural programming, then went freelance and took them on as my first client, and meanwhile started my own company at the end of 2016, doing cultural programming for non-institutional spaces.
So I was an opera singer and a harpist in Italy, in Greece, in England, and I wanted to come and sing here. And I came and I sang here for a while and started up a business on the side. I had 2 very difficult male bosses and decided to start up my own, just to fund my opera career. And that business, which is women-run, women employees only, here and in England, has been able to fund my dream of opening up a gallery. My father was a painter, an academic intellectual of the 60s who didn't indulge in drugs. He was very clear about that. And I grew up in a VW camper van, left the system in England in the 80s, and grew up essentially with that mentality of 1960s London, really. And never left that, and always wanted to open up a gallery, because my father did not understand the business side of it. And it was hard for him. He actually didn't care about selling any art, particularly. And my dream came true. And that's how I've opened up the gallery. And we opened it up with Lizzie, who co-directs, Elizabeth Thompson here. We opened it up about 2.5 years ago now. And here we are.
So after I went to college, I had this idea that I was going to work in the fashion business. Don't ask me why I thought that. And I entered the executive training program at Bloomingdale's, where they train you to be a buyer, because I thought I could just buy clothes all the time. And that seemed like a great job, since it was something that I had done privately, let's say. And so I was quickly disabused of that and realized that retail was not going to be in my future, at least not on that side of the retail exchange. And I decided to go back to graduate school. I had majored in art history in college, and I had a series of other sort of unsatisfactory jobs, but then went back to school and then kind of segued into working as an art consultant for a while, sort of in the contemporary arena, but not high end, and then decided to go back to graduate school. So I think my trajectory was also like, I wanted to be not in school, but I wanted to go back to school. So it was sort of like a push-pull. So I ended up then going back to graduate school and got an internship when I was in graduate school at a very small museum that doesn't exist anymore in New York City, very idiosyncratic museum called the Dahesh Museum. And I stayed there for about 12 years. I worked then at the American Federation of Arts, which is a traveling exhibition organization, putting together shows that then travel around to other museums around the country. And then I decided I wanted to get back into the museum side of things. And so when I saw a position at the Brooklyn Museum for what was then called the curator of exhibitions, I applied to that and have been there ever since. That was about almost 7 years ago, so working on a lot of different exhibitions there. And it's only in the past year, because of a change up there, that I have segued sort of back into my first love, which was European art, and now am in charge of that collection at the museum.
So I would love to hear what made you decide to get into the arts in the beginning. Was it something you just always knew? I mean, it sounds like you kind of came to it circuitously, but and what exactly kind of keeps you in the art world?
So my mother's an artist. I grew up in a house that was very inspired. And I think that there were a lot of interesting people coming through often. And I always really enjoyed that. And one of the things that I think really fell into place for me when it became clear sort of the direction that was the right one for me was very much the people. Like, I love the people side of it. In what other space do you get these sort of creative, thinking, curious, innovative people who take themselves seriously, but not too seriously, It's really, I wasn't able to find another space with those sort of just brilliant people. And so that was sort of the thing that really has kept me in it. Yeah.
So for me, I grew up in a vacuum, in basically the 1960s, in Greece and in Turkey. And when I came, and I was a performer, but I have a particular view on contemporary art and the state of contemporary art today, a very strong view on that there is a lack of discerning. It's almost impossible to be discerning unless you've had some kind of education. We were just talking about like any historical era, it's hard to see when you're in it. You have to look back. But I felt this overwhelming, and I have a very strong sense because of the way I was raised, which was with Dad in a very out of context. We had no television. We had I think we had BBC World News. That was it on the radio. So I grew up with the sort of learning what the essence of a timeless piece of art was, and with an idea of avant-garde, but not. And then I've just seen this repetitive shock tactic. It's getting very dull. I'm very bored, and it's been almost 40 years of it, and I feel I have a responsibility to bring back, not bring back because it exists, it's just, it needs to hone in my opinion. And I've been all over, I see the same problem wherever I am. And I want to not get back to the way it was at all. I want to push the envelope and move forward, but with quality and with that essence of what is timeless. What 100 years from now or 300 years from now will be truly worth something, and which would have been sold for $300 million, and that last man standing is the idiot that bought it, right? So that's sort of our mission as a gallery. That's why.
So how did I get into this? Why? I mean, it was a little more circuitous for me. I did major in art history. I grew up in Woodstock, New York, which is, of course, a very well-known artist colony from the early 20th century. And my father was a dentist there, and many of his patients growing up were artists and musicians, in fact. We're talking about the 60s and the 70s. And so he would often accept artwork in lieu of payment, and that led to an art collection at home that was wildly uneven, let's just say, but had some real standouts. And I like to joke now with my mom especially that one of the reasons that I got into it is because one of my dad's patients at the time in Woodstock was the painter Philip Guston. And he was having lots of dental work. And I was a very little girl at the time, and he invited my parents to his studio in Woodstock and said, "Oh, come in and you can pick whatever you want." And my parents, who are not artists and did not really have appreciated art, but they didn't have any background in it, went in and were confronted with wild images, including like cartoonish images and, Ku Klux Klan imagery that was very disturbing. And so they selected a lovely, lovely, but tiny little drawing. And so our joke, when I think about what they could have had, literally, which is at MoMA and so on. I'm like, well, Mom, if I had just got started with my career a little earlier, I could have had us, set for life. But I had this sort of immersion in this world of art in a way. But it really, for me, in college, the light bulb clicked when it was about studying images in context with history, right? Art history. And so what images can tell us about the times and the people that made them, what isn't visible in the image, and what does that tell you about the time, and so on. So I kind of fixated on that. And so for me, throughout the work that I've done, especially in the past, 20 years, I guess, it's been about being able to be close to the object and really studying the object. And unlike my co-panelists here, I'm one of these people that's constantly dealing with dead artists. So I don't get, the pleasure of thinking about, the artists that I'm dealing with and thinking about have stood the test of time, for better or worse in one way or another. So it's kind of a different set of concerns.
If I can just pipe up for a minute. Incidentally, my father is also a dentist, and also over the years has accepted artwork for treatment as well.
Did you see that article in the Times the other day? This just makes me think, was it in the Times? I'm sorry to interrupt, but there was literally an article about the dentist in Chelsea now who's doing that now. He's like the dentist to the art stars, and he's got this amazing collection because he's referred by all of the different artists. So there's a thing with dentists and art.
It clearly is a thing, yeah.
I would have loved to see both of their collections.
Well, much like your father's, it is wacko. Clearly he was not consulting my mother when he was choosing these pieces, so they are now all in the practice. They're not at home.
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, especially kind of to your point of what, what is art and what artists succeed and how you're trying to shape that through the gallery and thinking about, our maybe dentist fathers who maybe didn't have an eye for art, but somehow, were maybe influencing the art market somehow, But I'd love for you, Anita, to speak a little bit more about that and how, you mentioned that if you don't have the training, how do you discern a good artist or a piece of work or a body of work that might...
It's a sad thing to say, isn't it? Because ultimately, if you're alone with the piece, it should speak to you. And it should be separate from the artist, separate from any dialogue. It's a language of its own, which we fully believe. But there's so much noise, and not just in the art world. The media is, now with technology, but even before, it's a strong force telling people what they should and shouldn't know and how clever they should and shouldn't be. And I think some people absolutely can discern if they're open enough. But we, Lizzie and I, constantly, we have people coming into the gallery saying, I'm not quite sure what I meant to think. Nothing. Just to sit with it. So I think it's the noise that gets in the way. And like we were saying again before, there's always been Salieri's, who was a mediocre, so there's worse than that now, but there's always been a mishmash around the incredible maestros that we've known in every era. But I think at the moment there is just a lot of noise and tons of it and volume and this need to be always different, which is making a lot of things the same, ironically. So I think that's my feelings on that.
No, it's interesting. I guess I'm wondering, Lisa, if you think you looking at your father's collection now, if you some of those artists that maybe have done well, if you think.
You know what? Most of them remained sort of local artists that weren't really out on the world stage in the way that Gustin was. It was interesting because more of it had to do with the music industry. The band, Jimi Hendrix, all of the Woodstock people that you can think of. And so what? Their signature or something. They're not creating music for him. So. It really just was more of a feeling of being surrounded by the creative process that people were doing, whether they were doing it because they hoped to get recognition or just, to pay their dental bills to a kind-hearted man who would accept this material in lieu of money.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm like, I wish I had a dentist father now. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, back to your careers, and what would you say the most kind of rewarding part of your current position or career has been?
I think for me, it's the collaboration. Again, it comes back down to the people. Dreaming up projects with other organizations, other people, and then actually bringing them to fruition. And you know what? Sometimes not even bringing them to fruition. Often it doesn't even work out. But the absolute pleasure of going through those motions, it's great practice, and then when it comes through, it's amazing. But those conversations, I absolutely adore.
Well, very much what we're doing. For us as a gallery, I say us because we're a collaboration very much with Elizabeth Thompson here, who's the co-director. Creating a space for introspection again, for quiet, for slowing down, for opening. I mean, that's ultimately what is just the speed of things, which has its positives, obviously, society-wise. And when it comes to self-awareness, introspection, looking within, it was either Plato or Aristotle that said the education has one, my brain's gone. Education is to turn the eye of the soul to the light. It's about self-discovery. It's about going and turning inside, becoming wise, right? And I think many educational programs do and try, but there's a lot of competency and efficiency now that's being taught. And I know from friends of mine in other areas, in the corporate world, in other worlds, they had no sense of self-awareness till much later. So to create a space that gives that, and we also have these salon events built very much around the Greek folk music community. We're doing one in the Irish folk music community. I play the harp, and we bring music, and they're fabulous. We've got some people here that come to them, creating a sense of community, a sense of being in the moment, which I think is also what art is for, one of the reasons. So many reasons.
Well, I think I will echo what has been said, which is that I like working together with people, both colleagues and inside and outside the museum. But I think for me, because I've spent so much of my career making exhibitions, that is really the thing that I love the most, because that can take so many different shapes. And first of all, you're dealing with objects. As I said, you're close to the object, you're studying them, you are putting them in dialogue with each other. And the ultimate goal, I think, and this goes back to the connection with people, is a kind of reaching someone, helping somebody who comes in to have a certain kind of experience, because you put two paintings next to each other, and maybe they were familiar with one but not the other. Maybe they knew both of them but never saw them together, or whatever the combination is. And so you create something new with that. And there are so many different ways to make exhibitions, and I have mostly made historically based exhibitions, so I will not venture to talk about the contemporary installation practice. But I spent a lot of my career in school and whatnot teaching as well. So I do have that teaching gene in me, like getting up in front of a work of art and speaking about it and trying to reach people and make that light bulb turn on in their head. So to me, that's the most gratifying thing. If I put on a show and somebody comes, and especially, I'll just end with this, not the show that they expect to like, but we've had situations where I've heard anecdotally people come to see an exhibition and they're like, I thought I was going to hate this show, and I really loved it. I was so surprised. And so to me, that's even better than sort of the expected audience.
Very cool. So I guess on the flip side of that, what would you say the biggest challenges are?
On exactly the flip side of what I am tickled most by, the other side of the coin is that you are dealing with human beings that are deeply passionate, and some of them have egos, and there are some people that believe they are absolutely right, and like to argue. And all these things, they're the human beings. And for as wonderful as so many of the experiences are, there are also many experiences which are less than pleasant. And you can't just say, I don't want to do this with you anymore, because you're not 5 years old. You've got to make it work. And you've really got to find your inner diplomat, because artists are wonderful, but they're also artists, and there are many that will live up to their reputation. So yeah, I would say that would be the flip side.
With me, we're a contemporary art gallery. It's prime real estate. We're incubators for the next the next lot of the timeless type. So overhead. I mean, we sell out an entire show, we've covered our overhead. So we're looking at it sort of Castelli-like, that I buy a piece usually from each show or two when I can, and we sit on it, just like Castelli did with some of his. I remember, I think, didn't Rauschenberg sell one for $50, and that was a huge success, isn't it? So that, for us, it's an investment. It's a long-term investment. So the challenge for us is that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what's the real downside for me. And I think it doesn't come down to the personal. I mean, I've been very fortunate to always work with colleagues that I really enjoyed working with. And I should also say, Exhibit A, why I'm an art historian, all my artists are dead. So I only have to deal with like retrospective agita with these artists. So it's more, although I will say, partnering with some outside guest curators or whatever, it's a similar thing. They are right about what they want to do, but I have to represent the institution and I know what is better for our audience. And so there can be times when I have to bring out my inner diplomat as well, who is, very small and not really that good. The thing that that's the most horrible for me is really more of the larger issue. I work in a nonprofit organization that is constantly, strapped for cash. And so, the goals and the dreams and the ideas of me and my fellow curators there for the institution as a whole, have to come down to sort of a reality size. There's always the reality moment where it's like, no, we can't really do that unless we have some angel funder who's going to come in and, sponsor to the tune of X. And so, increasingly in the museum world, there is this kind of, there's always been the dance between, sponsorship and what you do and what the audience wants, and that is becoming increasingly more difficult and fraught in an era where corporate sponsorship particularly is vanishing, and there isn't necessarily a new generation of philanthropists who are coming in to take their place. So that's very challenging on a day-to-day basis, and it makes me unhappy.
Okay, so in light of working with others and collaborations, and I wanted to talk a little bit about being women in the art world, and I was delighted to hear that many of you have, for the most part, had good experiences and with your male counterparts. But do you feel there have been any disadvantages or maybe even advantages to being a woman in the arts? I'm one of the ones that said that, oh my God, how am I going to answer that question? Because I really didn't have any terrible experiences. I mean, looking back in my career, as I was saying, there are one or two, like what I call icky moments that, is just you can't be a woman really at all in any industry and not have that story in your background. And especially now where I am, I work at the other major encyclopedic museum in New York City with a female director, a female chief curator. We have women in most of the top executive positions at the museum. So, we have the Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art, the only center of its kind in a major museum in the United States. So, I work in an environment that's really woman-friendly on every possible level, and that's wonderful at this point. So that's really all I can,
I've only had one real job once, and it was with two male bosses, and one of them, just remember this story, found out a hotel I was staying at. I was taking a spa break on the weekend, and turned up at my door with a bottle of Jim Beam, and I can't even begin. And actually that was the reason, along taking some of my money anyway, long story, that I actually started up the female-run, female-only employee. All my employees are women. That was actually the reason I did it. So looking back on it now, he did me a huge favor. dreadful. And it was lunchtime too. And it was terrible. And as an opera singer, I mean, every conductor, every coach, I mean, it's anyone who's been in the performance world knows what it's like and what's expected of you and what you don't do. But yeah, that's other than that, I've had an incredible experience.
Oh, yeah, sorry, no, because you just made me think of one other thing, which is, I mean, kind of a positive too, because it was the first time I had, as I mentioned, I started the Brooklyn Museum in one position, and I went to a different position, and it was a position that was vacated by a very good friend of mine, a man who went on to become the director of a different museum. And they offered me the position, and I moved into it, and you know, we were such good friends, I said, so hey, what was your salary in this position? And he told me, and it was, you know, about, I want to say $6,000 or $7,000 more a year than my current position, and they had offered me the position with no talk of a raise to go with it. Again, going back to the through line, which is we have, you know, there's not a lot of money to go around. And so I struggled, like, for the first time, and it's that feeling that I think a lot of women have, like, okay, I'm gonna ask for this raise because I'm about to do the same job that this guy did and in the same position, and so I should at least get the same salary. And I have to say that it was like, you know, I didn't think I'd be that one like, oh, should I do it, should I not? But I actually had that, like, it was difficult for me because I said most of the upper management in the museum are women, but the financial person is a guy, and he's the one that I had to go to. But I did, and I made my case. And again, to the credit of my museum, it was not a question. They weren't aware. They had other, you know, they weren't thinking. They're like, absolutely. And they raised me up to have the commensurate salary as the man who had just filled that position. So, I mean, I thought that was, you know, a real positive vote in their favor.
I mean, it's interesting because, you know, if you don't ask,
Exactly.
Yeah.
it's going to be it's just not going to happen. If you ask, there's a chance they'll say no, there's a chance they'll say yes. So I feel like it's, to your point, you got to ask, even if it's uncomfortable. Absolutely. Just don't ask if you're unprepared. Like, make sure that you can fight your case. But yeah, the asking is, and you know, it's again, to your point, it's really funny because I've had so many conversations. I have been very fortunate. I have not had any, I've had several men who in my working life over the years that have been just the kind of champion that everyone should have. So I've been really fortunate, but it's really interesting how for all through my 20s, such a massive conversation with my peers was that question of asking for the raise, asking for the promotion, and the fact that it was a question about whether you should or whether you really deserved it. You know, can you really justify it? And why on earth is that? I mean, if you're having that conversation in the first place, then you do. Just get your thoughts straight, you know, put your notes down and do it. But it's really interesting because this is not a conversation, 100% sure this is not a conversation that men in their 20s are having. They're not wondering whether they should ask for it, they just do. So I think that is like just a mindset question that is totally beyond the arts, but just in general.
Yeah, it's much broader. Yeah. And I think it comes down to the basic, women are not investable because they're going to leave and have children. And it's time to get out of that, right? There's a book I'm reading at the moment, though, which we should all read, called The Male Factor. And it gives you men's point of view, whether right or wrong, often wrong, but it's interesting to, and not always. I think there's some really valid points and it's a woman writing it for women to get a view into, and again, I love men. It's really good. She wrote for women only, and then The Male Factor. And there are some really valid points, actually, running an organization with just women. It's a lot more emotional, which I actually quite like. But it's the idea that a lot of these men that were interviewed that, well, she's going to be the primary caretaker, so subsequently she's taking a Friday off, so she can't put the hours in that we're putting in, she shouldn't be able to be made partner. But, well, isn't there a way you can both be the secondary caregivers each? Or isn't that's, I think, the core of the issue? Why does the mother always have to be assumed as the primary caregiver, subsequently paid less, a less investable product?
1,000 years of Western history.
Right? Damn it.
That's your answer.
Wrong.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the interesting thing is, like, if you hadn't had that conversation or relationship with the person whose job you were filling, you might not have thought to ask. I mean, yeah. Right, and, you know, to your point, that's probably, you know, something that maybe men are doing more automatically or without, you know, without those kind of conversations. So kind of continuing on the subject, female artists continue to be underrepresented in museums and galleries, and, you know, there's the kind of anecdotal, like, have there really been no great women artists? And I mean, maybe, Lisa, you can speak to this a little bit more, working more with historical artists.
Yes, the recently passed away and much beloved Linda Nochlin, feminist art historian, pioneer, who wrote that article in the early 70s, Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists? And of course, it was a rhetorical question. And of course, the answer, which now seems very obvious, but was actually quite groundbreaking at the time in art history, was it was an institutional one. It was because women were not allowed to participate in the prevailing metrics and institutions which judged greatness. So if the deck is stacked against you from the beginning, if you're not allowed to enter the art academies where you're going to win the commissions and so on, you're never going to be able to get into that race. So it was about, you know, interrogating and dismantling the institution that is creating that appearance of lack of greatness. Yeah, I mean, and in the museum, certainly the museum world, it's just as bad, you know. I mean, again, although I'm going to be the standard bearer for the Brooklyn Museum, having a Center for Feminist Art, you know, we have a really strong commitment and have always had to women artists. And one of my main goals going forward, and again, somehow we always come back to money at the Brooklyn Museum. I feel like it's like a, you know, banging the same drum, but I want to add more pre-20th century, you know, even 18th and 19th century women artists to the collection. You know, we should have a Vigie Lebrun. You know, we should have any number of the female artists from earlier eras, and we don't. And the fact that we don't also speaks to the other institutional problem with the museum, which is that, you know, where did you get your collection? The people who were collecting things that ultimately left them to you as a museum, they were collecting, you know, the prevailing male artists. So there's this whole kind of system in play that, unless you're very lucky, prevents you from having it. I mean, I'm very proud that we have a beautiful Bert Marceau in our collection, you know, the most impressionist of the impressionists in my view, and we were the first museum in New York to have a Bert Marceau. Very early, it entered in the 1920s. So, I mean, that also tells you something of the progressive nature of Brooklyn's collecting when they could. But it's a problem, and it only will take, as with everything, it takes more women being in more positions of power and decision-making, both financially and art historically, to enact that change.
Yeah, do you guys have anything to add from a contemporary perspective, working with living female artists?
Well, we're very proud of our women artists, and we try, again, we judge art separately from the person, but we're also we're fully female, so we want to represent as many high quality female artists as we can. Verva Hinamo, which Lizzie will speak on after this, is superb. Gloria Ortiz Hernandez, Fred Johnson over here. We have Joan Waltermatt. I mean, we have some incredible female artists. And again, we're an incubating space. We incubate the artists. So we're trying to break that. And I hadn't actually thought of it quite in that historical context to that degree. It's true. So yeah, we're trying. Again, it's more about the art than the artist, and it should always be that way, in my opinion. But still, we are trying to represent more women.
Great. So kind of on the flip side of that, thinking about some things that are coming to light about some male artists that we may not like so much with the Me Too movement and so much attention being paid to some men's personal lives, and just kind of wondering how do we deal with that as, appreciators? Do we still celebrate and show artists by people who we may not like their personal choices? And,
Well, I mean, I can tell you the walls of museums would be empty if you were going to judge them on their personal lives in many cases. I mean, I'll let you, if you guys want to jump in. I mean, I have other things I can say about that. But
I mean, I think that there's got to be a separation, unfortunately. And much to your point, if you were to go digging through almost anyone's personal life, the unsavory things you would come across, would you be so horrified after a while? Probably not. However, it's obviously to varying degrees. But I do think one has to be careful to make the separation. Unfortunately,
I would absolutely agree. I think highlighting it in a sensational way is a no-no. To not highlight it make it almost something as a shock tactic rather than highlighting that this person did a bad thing. There was I won't say the artist, but it was a portrait of a paedophile created with lots of little children's hands. I found that unsavory and unnecessary for me. That's what I think it probably shouldn't happen, but
I think it's also different, or you can look at it differently, whether the artist is still alive, whether there are victims currently being impacted or living victims who are being impacted versus something historical, which isn't to say that whatever happened in history gets a pass, but it's hard because, to your point, you don't want to fall into the trap of biography, right? I mean, that's kind of an old-fashioned way to consider an artist's work exclusively, but it is difficult. I mean, I deal, like I said, with a lot of dead, predominantly white male artists who were very shitty people, and this is not a secret. This is well known in their biographies. I mean, Degas, Gauguin, any of these guys. So you have to say the work. To your point, it has to stand alone. I mean, if it has had impact and validity and has moved people for whatever reason, and that's more than we can get into here, I think you can't, throw it out. I think you can acknowledge. I mean, it's been something I've been thinking about a lot, in terms of these little wall chats that we have at museums, which apparently no one reads. That's another thing that, okay. But, what if we do a hang of all of these artists with unsavory biographical details, particularly those that resonate in the Me Too moment now, and sort of just talk about that in the label? You can see this picture, but then you're going to learn not about anything historical, but you're going to learn about, Picasso, great guy to women, great guy. I mean, you could write a whole, but so there you go. I don't know, just something to think about.
Yeah, no, I don't think there is an answer, unfortunately. I think it's something that we're still thinking about and sorting through. Well, I guess I would like to open it up to the audience now for any questions.
Are you all collectors of art? And if you are, what is your most prized piece in your collection?
Yes, I do have a small growing collection. And you know, it's the favorite changes every day. A lot of them are on the wall, a lot of them are not. And I think that's the pleasure of collecting for your own personal joy, is that it doesn't matter whether it goes up in value or not. It's purely for the fun of it, and you know, because it makes you happy, and that's my approach.
It's the best approach. I collect all my artists, and I own the majority of my father's estate, and we have one little mini Whistler, which is incredible. Yes, which my mother has. Yeah, I proudly collect our living artists and my dad, who's no longer alive. And for joy.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've sort of, I mean, I collect, I have some prints that I collect, but I feel like I sort of have a palate cleansing feeling about it. You know, there are definitely a number of contemporary artists whose work I'm interested in, but I find that I'm interested in it because I'm interested in artists, contemporary artists who directly engage the imagery or tropes of historical art and twist it in some way that I find interesting. But sadly, I can't afford any of the art that I'm interested in, and I know that's not true. I know that's not really true. But no. So I don't have a large collection, and I am still waiting for my Gustin, which is mine. So that will be my one great thing.
Yeah, do you have a dream list of who you would collect?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to give you this. It doesn't amplify, it's just for the video.
Oh.
Yeah.
So Jerry Saltz did something about the Coke-sponsored fountains at the Met, and Nan Goldin did something about the Sackler-sponsored room for the Temple of Dendur. I don't ask if anybody has a statement, but I ask if you have some way to begin to think about it in your own ongoing, daily. We have all this coming at us, as you say, day after day. Besides the art, there's the art world and its particular politics. Any thoughts at all about those two particular cases? Thank you.
I mean, we have a named Sackler Gallery. It's the Sackler Center for Feminist Art. However, as I learned recently, Elizabeth Sackler's father was the other brother. You all know that, right? So, yeah. No, but I mean, all of this by way of saying that this is one of the toughest things, right? And again, working in a nonprofit, in a nonprofit model in the contemporary landscape, I think it's very hard to say no to money. I mean, and if you haven't worked in a big 400-person operation with union people and from top to bottom. I'm just saying it's such a hard and intractable thing. Now, I haven't thought it through fully, but I feel that somewhere in there's possibly something different in what the Museum of Natural History has faced, which is that having Rebecca Mercer on their board, who is a climate denier, a climate change denier, for a museum that actually presents scientific information about that. That to me is kind of a red line that I can get behind despite her money. But somehow I feel like as much as I personally do not buy into the Koch brothers and as much as I love Jerry's stunt that he did, I think that's tougher somehow for a museum. Oh, which one? What are you talking? Which? Oh.
They added some information about
Oh, that's a whole different. Yeah.
They added information. was one. But
That's different. That's a whole different set of issues. The idea of monuments and historical information, and I mean, there's.
how each of us can begin to grapple with these very tough questions.
It is very tough.
Any other thoughts?
I think my other business works with unnamed, forever unnamed, to luxury market. So I think that if there's money to give to museums, you've got to take it. It's an expensive world to remain authentic, and that's what we're trying to do here. A museum is incredibly expensive to run. And the way that the world works at the moment, it's a very expensive world. And we have to maintain art collections, good and bad. I mean, we're maintaining a good one. But when there's money in a non-profit organization, you've got to take it, and people should be giving more. That's my thought, personally.
Get me started.
Yeah. There's the money. The money is there. Money is there.
You know, I do the cultural programming for a hotel, a for-profit organization that for 30 years has invested heavily in programming. And it's extraordinary, and it's really, it says a lot about the organization. And the reality is that I think there's a way of giving money, you know? There's a way of doing it that keeps it as authentic as it can. You know, so yeah, agreed.
Any other questions? Okay, I just want to wrap it up. And was there a question?
No, I think no.
Oh yeah, no, I wanted to give you all a chance to, if there's anything that you're working on that you're really excited about, any upcoming exhibits, projects, programming.
So we, back in the beginning of February, end of January, beginning of February, did a week-long residency at the hotel. We had a visual artist, a poet, a composer, and a photographer spend a week in the hotel exploring Midtown East. And off the back of that, we are putting together a publication of their findings, which should be ready in the next couple of months. So soon to come.
We have Barry Schwabsky curating our next exhibition. Lizzie's going to speak on Verve, our current exhibition, and that's April 25th. It's called The Divine Joke. It's a mixture of women and men artists, women, female and male, and they're all fairly young, which is great. Something else that we need to be investing in. So that's what's upcoming for us.
Well, we have a lot of things happening at the museum. I'm going to push a project that's not mine specifically, but the museum's. We're taking a show that we are modifying substantially called Radical Women, Latin American Artists in the 60s and 70s, I think. I don't have the exact title down, but it's going to be phenomenal, and I think it speaks a lot to what we're talking about here, which is artists that don't have broad recognition as they should, and really highlighting them. So it's going to be a revelation, I think, to a lot of people. So come to the Brooklyn Museum in April sometime.
Okay, thank you all again so much. And I just want to turn the mic over to Lizzie Thompson, who's going to tell you a little bit about the exhibit on view.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks. So yes, I am Elizabeth, co-director of Anita Rogers Gallery. So thank you everybody for coming tonight and for participating in our discussion. And I'd like to invite everybody to stay afterwards, have a drink, and take a look at the show. So it is Verva Hinnemo 4 Feet. She is a Finnish and Swedish artist who has actually been with us since we first opened in 2016 and who knew Anita way before and who has sort of really helped open the gallery in a way. So I invite you to stay, look, and even more than that, come back on a day when no one else is here except for me or Anita and read Verva's statement and listen to what Verva has to say about the work and then just spend some time with it. So please do that. And then in a little more commercial kind of things, I wanted to thank a few people who gave us gift bag products tonight. We have Soul Cacao Craft Chocolate, Laura Geller Cosmetics, and Sweetwater Labs, who I think the founder was going to just say a couple words. Co-founder.
Oh, it's
Let's go. Hello, that was a wonderful presentation. Nadia and I started Sweetwater Labs. This is one of our bags that you'll be getting when you leave. It's part of the gift bag situation when you're leaving. We started it, Nadia and I met 3 years ago, and I am not into skincare. I know very little about skincare, just to let you know. She just doesn't like public speaking, but you can speak with her after if you want. And as a guy, I did nothing my entire life, and she introduced me to what she was creating for 12 years of apothecary research and trying to bring back the science of it. And about a year and a half ago, the end of 2016, we started the company just to see what would happen, because in this day and age, you could start your own website, you could do things that you couldn't do 15, 20 years ago without a lot of capital or investment. And it's done better than we expected at times. So this year, we're figuring out ways to expand. We get orders throughout the country, a little bit internationally. So it's just exciting for us. It's a labor of love, a passion. We're figuring out how to do it as a business, but the main thing is that Nadia creates products that work incredibly well, and she could talk with you about it if you have any questions for her. Don't ask me, because I really don't know. She's the chemist. I'm helping out with other aspects of the business as we figure it out. This is besides our careers and our regular work. She works in finance. She's amazing at a lot of things she does. This is one of them. So I hope you like the skincare. These are 3 of the products that you'll be getting, and then we have other products. You can look at our website. You can look at some of the information that's in the bag. So we hope you enjoy, and we hope it is nourishing and hydrating for your skin.
And then one more thing before we wrap up. I wanted to introduce you all to Kandace Fuller, who is the managing editor of Womanly Magazine. She's going to say a few words.
I will. Hello. So I'm here because, I've worked pretty closely with Anita and Lizzie, but also because I work for an entirely, woman-run magazine, which is about art and health and the global woman. So we, sort of find underrepresented artists and writers, and we try to serve underserved communities of women and just give them, information and art that, they never would have had before. And so about a year ago now, we started, so we just had our year anniversary, and there are about more than 24 of us now who are working, and we just got funded by the Brooklyn Arts Council, and we're, I think in a couple of weeks here, gonna have our inaugural print issue, which is all about just sort of providing health information and art to women who, need it, from women who you don't hear from often. And we are just really happy to be here and just hearing about, projects, young projects and businesses from, women in the arts is just like super inspiring. And we just hope that, you might check us out, follow us on Instagram, and just think about, supporting underrepresented, female voices. Thanks.
Okay, that's it. Please stay, have a drink, look at the art. Enjoy. Thank you.